Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, pretty strong jobs numbers for November. Almost 250,000 new jobs created, which puts the total at north of 2 million in President Trump's first year. The unemployment rate down to just over 4%, which, if you believe that number, which I don't, but nonetheless, it's an indicator that is used to tell us a little bit something. The U6 number, the underemployed, which includes the underemployed, is probably a more accurate reflection. But there do seem to be positive signs for growth that could be made more positive if Republicans get a tax reform plan to the president's desk, which also looks likely. So everything is coming up roses this Christmas, isn't it? To answer that question, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Jimmy Pethokoukis, CNBC contributor and columnist for the American Enterprise Institute. James, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on this morning.
So are you sanguine about the future of this little experiment called America after the November jobs numbers?
Well, you know what? I was very upbeat and positive about the great American experiment for the jobs numbers. I remain
good.
After the job number. Probably not going to let a single jobs report. But I think it shows this expansion, which began in the summer of 2009. Sort of, it is what it is. We're still creating lots of jobs. I think we've had kind of a little bump up here lately in GDP growth. I don't think the ability of this economy to generate economic growth has changed much over the past year, or really over the past few years. Listen, I think things are okay, and now is the time we should be, at least policymakers in Washington, should be attempting to fix America's longer-term problems. So we have an opportunity to do that here. We'll see if we do.
Well, let's talk about the jobs added. Was it mostly in retail because of Christmas coming up?
No, not really. I think everybody who looks around knows that we're not seeing the same kind of retail, season, Christmas time hiring that we used to. Obviously the retail industry is undergoing some changes. But listen, we had over 200,000 jobs created. So whenever you have numbers like that, it's going to be pretty broad-based. Wage growth is kind of, is what it is. I don't think we should necessarily expect much higher wage growth unless we get our productivity up. So again, you could look at this report, or you could look at a report from a year ago, and they all look kind of the same. It's a lot of really stability in the economy, which maybe isn't so bad. We went through this horrible period in 2008 and 2009 when we got a lot of instability, and it wasn't very pleasant. And
we've also seen a pretty decent recovery over not just November, of course, but over the last several years, and in particular this year in the manufacturing sector, which is the real wealth-producing sector. A lot of new manufacturing jobs created, outside of Illinois, of course. Yeah, listen,
manufacturing is an important sector. It is a productive sector. I wouldn't expect that to be the big jobs driver over coming years. It's a place where if you're concerned about automation, that will continue to be a sector where you're going to have a lot of robots, and that will continue. Yeah, well, I am concerned about the robots, because according to Elon Musk, humankind only has a 5 to 10% chance to survive the oncoming war with the robots. Well, look, careful. They're just around the corner. I think we need. If you look at productivity, how productive are workers, and you get more productive workers by training them better, giving them more machines, having them operate differently. Being innovative, we need more robots, and we're going to get more robots, and that's always been the case. So we have to learn how to educate our kids better, train and retrain our workers better, and that's if I was sitting in Congress, I'd be focusing a lot on that.
I remember when we had camera operators, and then they were replaced with robots. And
then they killed all the journalists.
No, and then they slammed into Joan Esposito on the anchor desk.
See?
The first week on the job.
That's how it starts.
It was very dangerous.
Shots fired.
Exactly.
Get down, take cover.
Yeah.
But with these job numbers, though, I mean, should the average investor adjust their long-term plan based on strong or weak job numbers?
Oh, I would not change my long-term investment plans
Ever?
based on any one economic report, or maybe any 10 economic reports. Listen, if America does well, the stock market will do well. I'm a long-term investor, and I wouldn't change things. I'd stay away from the Bitcoin.
Oh no!
Come
We were
on.
just going to go in on one.
Portfolio. I don't know. Listen, Dan seems like he might be one of these secret Bitcoin millionaires.
I know.
Maybe
Did you get
he
one
wouldn't be here this
for
morning.
What started at $200, and now what is it at? 16,000.
That's where it was Friday. Yeah,
I think, yeah, and it surged overnight.
and the futures markets.
But how do you
trading
get a
markets, they opened
Bitcoin?
up. Yeah.
Can you explain how do you buy one? Because you can't buy it through Edward Jones or Morgan
No,
Stanley.
you go to like Coinbase and you set up your own account. It's very easy. I mean, so I've
you go
heard.
You go to Walgreens.
Yeah, you get a little card at the kiosk.
There's a cart. You just pile them in. Pile all in the Bitcoins. Don't drop one on your way out. You need a computer. That's helpful.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
so you go on your computer and just buy one?
Yeah. Remember
Yeah.
that they give you that you have like a password or code that is basically your Bitcoin, and if you lose that code, you got no more Bitcoin. You can't access your Bitcoin.
Really?
So remember, keep those post-its handy.
Ethereum is my cryptocurrency of choice, Jim Pethokoukis. So
I know that you go for the other market.
I'm a contrarian.
Broad portfolio
of
Bitcoin.
cryptocurrency.
That's the kind of investor you are. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, my
yeah.
God. You have Bitcoins, don't you?
I can't believe that
You do.
Jim is
you.
raining on my cryptocurrency parade. In addition to discounting the camera that attacked Joan Esposito, which was like the first shot fired at Fort Sumter in the oncoming war with the robots.
This is why you're moving off the grid, Dad.
Exactly.
Robots. Worry about the class of the currency.
Yeah.
You're going to do the show from a former Minuteman silo in Montana. I get it.
Yeah, and that may explain why I have knives in every one of my door jams at home, just in case. All right, let's talk a little bit about that tax plan that needs to get reconciled between the Republican caucuses on the Hill. How do you think that shakes out? We had Paul Ryan on the show last week, and he was a little cagey, as he's wont to be, about where the House might give and where the Senate might give, but some of the obvious big-ticket items where there's a difference of opinion, things like the AMT as well as the individual mandate with respect to Obamacare.
Right. Those are a couple areas. There's still a debate about how you pay for it with the state and local tax deduction. Even the president has mentioned perhaps raising that the corporate tax cut, which has dropped down from 35% to 20%. Maybe that 20% should be 22%. To help smooth over some of these decisions, you have a little bit more money to spend. So that remains an issue. Listen, the longer this thing sits out there, the more people are actually going to start to read this bill, and the more the lobbyists are going to read the bill and figure out things they don't like. Whether it is on capital gains taxes, on which of your investments should be taxed, should be the first ones, last out, should be which shares, should the capital gains taxes apply to. So there's going to be a lot of these small issues, and Republicans don't have a huge margin for error here, and especially they want to try to get this thing done before if Roy Moore loses in Alabama, before his replacement is seated. So they feel a little bit of a time crunch, and there remains some outstanding issues.
Well, the winner's going to be seated on the 13th, the day after the election. But what about corporate tax rates? I mean, how much exactly do you think they're going to agree upon? 22%, 20%?
Yes, I don't.
And does it really matter?
When they made the decision to make the individual income taxes temporary, that meant that you were probably going to get a fairly low rate. They could afford a fairly low rate on the corporate taxes. So whether it's 20 or 22, listen, that is not the difference between whether this economy grows 2% or 3%. This tax bill will help incrementally growth. So maybe a tenth of a percentage point or 0.2 of a percentage point over a certain period of time. So I don't think you'll look back on the economy 10 years from now and look at all the economic statistics, other than perhaps the debt, and say, you can see that's where the tax cut kicked in. I don't think that's the case. I think it'll be, to the extent it's going to be a plus, I think it'll be incremental. Government, we need to have a lot of different policy changes, not pin it out all on a magic tax cut to solve all our problems.
Right, and one of the other areas that's been underreported generally, it's gotten a little bit more ink of late, I would suggest, but is the Trump administration's defanging of the administrative state. I mean, the absence of new regulation is really paradigm shifting as compared to the last 25 years of Republican and Democrat presidents. And part of that has to go with the choices he's made for important cabinet offices and the secretaries of those cabinets. But isn't that a big story that's been a bit underreported this year about just the reduction in the administrative state effectively, even reduction by not letting it continue to grow at its pace over the last 25 years?
Right. Listen, other countries see regulation as a problem too. And for instance, in Canada, they've had this rule where if you want a new regulation, you got to get an old one, or for every new one, you got to get rid of two old ones. So that general idea is a good idea. You have to see how it's going to be implemented. For me, so some of the biggest regulations, like hurting growth, aren't necessarily even at the federal level.
Sure.
There's just a report came out this morning that showed these various occupational licensing rules, where you have to go to school, you have to take $10,000 worth of classes, to cut hair. Or
Yeah,
like
right.
that. But those rules, brand new study out showing those rules not only are bad for growth, make it very difficult for people to move across country. And we've seen a lot less interstate migration, so people aren't moving to where the jobs are, and we've made it harder for them to do it. So what I would like is for this administration to pay a lot more attention to the regulations that we know are hurting growth, even if they're at the state and local level, and either begin to talk about it, maybe you could do kind of like some sort of prize system to encourage these states to examine how their licensing rules hurt growth. So I think broadly on deregulation, there's a lot more we can do.
Well, sure. And I'll tell you, I mean, in Illinois, more hours to become a hairstylist than to become an EMT are required. I mean,
Right.
it's
Right.
really...
That's like one of the classic examples.
Yeah.
Also in healthcare, letting non-doctors do things that they could do, but doctors aren't letting them do. Registered nurses, there's a lot more they could do, but there are a lot of rules saying they can't do these things. That kind of thing could really help transform our health system too. So these rules need to be looked at, because I think they're really an impediment to growth, but we're just not talking about them.
Well, let me ask you a question in that vein then, because we've seen some of the attitudes, the research data on the attitudes of millennials towards capitalism, which are a bit frightening. And as a Schumpeterian Gales of Creative Destruction guy, the decline in entrepreneurship in this country and the decline in interest in entrepreneurship vis-a-vis practicing capitalism.
All right, listen, if you just look at the pages, it seems like that's going great. You hear about what's going on in Silicon Valley. Entrepreneurship just isn't what's going on in Silicon Valley. That we've had a big decline in people starting businesses. So when you take the decline in starting businesses plus people aren't moving as much, you have kind of more of a stagnant society. It's a less dynamic country. And listen, the millennials. If a lot of what your experience with capitalism is, this big, we had the financial crisis and a very slow recovery. I think that may shade people's views. But listen, if they want a higher standards of living, if they want to continue to have amazing, cool stuff provided by the private sector, they want their children at some point to have higher standards of living. That will be driven by the private sector and markets. We need a better safety net in this country, but as far as having growth driven by the private sector and innovation, I mean, there is no alternative to that.
He is James
Not even in Sweden.
What about, wow, not even Sweden.
Right.
Boy, that is a real exclamation point. Okay. All right, James Pethokoukis, who is not taking a long position on cryptocurrency, but is a CNBC contributor.
Or am I?
Oh, they see, we need full transparency here. Jim, also a columnist for the American Enterprise Institute. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, guys.
And a Jeopardy winner. And he
Yes, he
joined
is.
us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're